Hello guys, I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. This is AfriPost and welcome to today's video. Now, for many years, black people have been considered to be inferior and that they do not deserve respect from other races. This specifically comes from white supremacists and people who think that their skin color should make them more important than others. And then this has led to the question of whether reparations should be paid or not. Because all we know is that black people, both in Africa and also in the United States and in Caribbean and other parts of the world, have faced a lot of discrimination and social injustices that have been perpetuated and inflicted on them by white people. So there is a sense in which these people, for equity to prevail and for sense of respect to prevail, there is need for reparations to be paid. But why is it that most times when these discussions come, some white people think that blacks must not be paid free money that they do not deserve? Yet in the history of America, we have seen Japanese Americans receive huge reparations and letters of apology from the president. We've also seen Holocaust survivors receiving reparations. I like the fact that some white people are coming to their senses and realizing that for a very long time they have been wrong. And that is why we are making this video today. So let's watch the reactions of these two white men and the reactions of their black counterparts. Then let's come back and talk about it more. Let's watch.
And I'm telling you folks, right there, how white folks got so rich. The untold story of American white supremacy. I mean, I just read about the Indian land grab. And I'm like, my gosh, man, good Lord. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. No wonder we don't want to teach the truth. Because that means we've got to look people in the face and say, our forefathers were the worst people in the history of mankind. The things that they did, that manifest destiny, that kind of mentality has been atrocious. What we have done to the African Americans. The estimated number of wealth that came from slavery, from free labor, and that's what it was. And they estimate that the amount of money that came from slavery was around $24 trillion. You can't even grasp that much money. The average person has a hard time grasping what $1 billion is. $1 trillion. Holy shit. And a lot of people don't want to admit the truth because a lot of people also are scared that what happens if we actually do have to maybe pay reparations. Understand that everything, that beautiful Capitol in Washington, D.C. was built by slave labor. The majority of the churches in this country were built by slave labor. Our forefathers were lazy. And if they were smart, which they were, but the problem was they were cunning and sad. And I'm telling you folks,
when white people in the United States balk at the idea of paying reparations to black Americans who descended from slaves, they disagree with the Bible. Reparations are a form of compensation or restitution made to those who have suffered injustice, particularly those in cases of racial inequality, discrimination, and slavery. The idea of paying reparations to black Americans is not a new one. It has been a topic of discussion for decades, if not centuries. However, it has gained renewed attention and support in recent years, following the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the growing recognition of systemic racism in American society. As a Christian, I believe that reparations are not only a matter of justice and equity, but also a reflection of God's character and values. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of God's concern for the oppressed, the marginalized, and the downtrodden. From the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt to the ministry of Jesus among the poor and the outcast, we see a consistent theme of God's love for those who are on the margins of society. One of the key biblical principles that underlie the idea of reparations is the concept of restitution. In the book of Leviticus, we see God commanding the Israelites to make restitution to those whom they have wronged. Leviticus 6:1-5 says, "If anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor or has found something lost and lied about it, swearing falsely in any of all the things that people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and has realized his guilt and will restore what he took by robbery when he got it by oppression or deposit that was committed to him, or the lost thing that he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore in full and shall add a fifth to it and give it to him to whom it belongs on the day that he realizes his guilt." This passage emphasizes the importance of making restitution to those who have been wronged, and not just restoring what was taken, but adding to it as a form of compensation. This principle of restitution can be applied to the issue of reparations to Black Americans who have suffered centuries of enslavement, discrimination, and systemic oppression. Another biblical principle that supports the idea of reparations is the concept of Jubilee. In Leviticus 25, God commands the Israelites to observe a Jubilee every 50th year, during which all debts are forgiven, all slaves to be set free, and all property to be returned to its original owners. This was a radical idea of economic justice designed to prevent the accumulation of wealth and power in the hands of a few, and to ensure that all members of society had equal access to resources and opportunities. The idea of Jubilee can be seen as a model for reparations in that it seeks to address the root causes of inequality and oppression rather than just treating the symptoms. By forgiving debts, freeing slaves, and returning property, Jubilee seeks to create a more just and equitable society, one in which everyone has the opportunity to flourish. As a Christian, I believe paying reparations to Black Americans is only a matter of justice and equity, but also it is a reflection of God's values and character. Through the biblical principles of restitution and Jubilee, we see a model for how we can address the historical and systemic injustices that have plagued our society for far too long. While the issue of reparations is complex and contentious, I believe that as Christians, we have a responsibility to seek justice.
Why do Black people deserve reparations for something they weren't alive for? That's a great question. Let's ask Sarah Beth what she thinks. This is Jebediah. Jebediah inherited over 100 acres of land, his father's South Carolina plantation in the late 1800s. He was able to use the money from that land to buy 100 more acres. In the mid-1950s, passed the land down to his son, Mark, who then sold the land for $5 million. Mark started a successful real estate company that he passed down to his son, Tim. Tim was able to take all of the wealth that he generated basically because he was just born. This is his daughter, Sarah Beth. Sarah Beth was able to go to the best schools, live in the best neighborhoods, and have the most wonderful extracurricular activities. He's now getting an engineering degree from Syracuse, already has jobs lined up on Wall Street, has never had to work a job. Are we really gonna look Sarah Beth in her cold, dead eyes and tell her that she doesn't deserve the opportunities that's been afforded to her just because she wasn't born when the wealth is accumulated? To be quite honest, I don't know. Do descendants of enslaved Black people deserve reparations? Absolutely. You bet your bottom dollar. But I think that we have unfortunately reached past the point where it will become too complicated to figure out how to disperse reparations and who gets them. Me personally, for example, I know that I descend from enslaved Black people on both sides of my family, but the records are too skewed and all over the place to the point where I don't know how I would actively prove that to like the IRS or somebody. And that's the case for millions of Black Americans right now. And then lastly, do we really have the faith that our government is competent enough to pull something like that off? Because I recall 2 years ago where the government completely botched stimulus checks and relief aid during the pandemic. So do we deserve reparations? Absolutely. But at this point, I don't know if it's possible.
The only reason anybody would be against reparations is if they don't feel that this country has anything to repair in how it has treated and continues to treat Black folks.
I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago for whom none of us currently living are responsible is a good idea.
First off, Mitch, you were alive 100 years ago. Look at you. Second, reparations are not just about slavery. They're about repairing the incessant harm that has been done to Black people in this country since we were stolen and brought here, and that does not end with slavery. These people act like Jim Crow was just like a minor inconvenience. It was violence. And I don't know if y'all been looking around lately, but basically reparations should be owed for what was done like 15 minutes ago in this country.
We've, tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war.
If the Civil War was really about righting the wrongs of slavery, then we wouldn't have all these Confederate flags and Confederate statues still just confederating around to this day. To this day!
By passing landmark civil rights legislation.
These people wake up every morning to undo civil rights legislation.
We've elected an African-American president.
Now you know you ain't vote for Barack. We need to become reparationists. We need to make preparations for reparations. And I say that comes with us first making reparations a part of our culture. This should be a part of our lifestyle. And we should be demanding that reparations be given to us by whoever is in the presidency and by whoever wants to be president. And also by our local and state governments. And I don't think that means just waiting to the last minute of an election and saying that we're not going to vote for you unless you give us reparations. Nah. We should be getting behind candidates who already believe in this. And all you white folks who want to be down, baby, you better be reparationists too. That's the new question for your white friends. Do you believe Black people should get reparations? See, reparations are not a capital gain. They're an ethical practice. Because in a society where advancement is determined by money, the only way to correct the systematic hindrance of that advancement is by providing money. Reparations are not some far-reaching thing that have never been figured out before. We need to stop looking at reparations as something we need to imagine. Consider them as something that is very real that needs to happen. What we need to imagine is what we are going to do with the reparations to make sure that our community and ourselves are taken care of. We need to become reparationists.
Now, I like the fact that you find that most of these white people are starting to realize that there are certain things that happened to Blacks, and the people who did them really did bad things. For instance, the first speaker there is talking about having read about the Indian land grab, where the Europeans came to America and took away the land from the original people who are already settling in the United States, the Indians for that matter. So you realize that this is something that is really worth discussion, because how is it that much of the wealth that was owned by original or indigenous people is taken up by people who are just settlers? So this must really be explored and discussed. And that is why when Indians talk about reparations and the need to have freedom to hold and own land, this is something that should be non-negotiable, because they should be allowed to own that land without any discussion. The land was originally theirs, and the white peeps who came are just settlers who took advantage of the weakness of the people who existed then and robbed them of their natural resources. And if you look at the argument by the second guy there, he's bringing the spiritual aspect of it, where he says what the Bible says and what really should happen according to him. So I came across an article here that was highlighting the reparations that have been paid, because one question that has always been asked in the United States is, why is it that when Black people want to be paid reparations, the topic degenerates into something else? They start calling people names. It becomes a colorism issue. It becomes a racist issue. It becomes something that a certain group of people tend to think that that is favoritism, that is undeserved. So here is an article from the Atlantic that the main heading here is what reparations actually bought. Now, it reads, in 1990, the United States government began mailing out envelopes each containing a presidential letter of apology and a $20,000 check from the Treasury to more than 82,000 Japanese Americans who during World War II were robbed of their homes, jobs, and rights and incarcerated in camps. This effort, which took a decade to complete, remains a rare attempt to make reparations to a group of Americans harmed by force of law. So if you look at that, you get to understand that reparations that was directed towards Japanese Americans was reasonable, and it was something that the president himself saw and thought that it was something well deserved and no discussion should take place, because the people who were incarcerated wrongly, the people who were robbed of their homes and their belongings need to be reparated. But what we come to realize here is that when the discussion targets black people or even African Americans, then the tune changes. People start thinking otherwise. People start thinking like they do not really have to talk about what was going on. So for me, I think it is very, very important for us to understand what reparations are before even we start discrediting it and talking about it in derogatory terms. So what really do you understand reparations to be? Reparations are meant to acknowledge and repair the causes and consequences of human rights violations and inequality in countries emerging from dictatorships, armed conflicts, and political violence, as well as societies dealing with racial injustices and legacies of colonization. So if you look at it from that definition alone, Africa deserves to be paid reparations. The Caribbean countries need to get reparations. Black Americans in the United States must be given their well-deserved reparations. And the black guy in that clip has really broken down this thing down very well, because there are certain people who have always come out and said that they did not benefit directly from the activities of their forefathers. But if you look at the analogy that has been broken down by that black speaker there, he is saying that the great-grandparents of these white people obtained land wrongfully or even owned slaves. These slaves worked to help create a company that remains to be a family business. This family business gets passed down generations, and it gives people or even descendants of the slave owners advantages in terms of economic advantages, that they are able to access certain things that others are not able to access. So because blacks worked for these slave owners without being paid anything, then it is very, very important that the person who inherits the sweat and blood of these black people must be ready and able to really come out and say that we were wrong, and here is what we are paying to say sorry for what we did. We know we cannot make it up for you, but this is a small gesture that we are bringing to you and saying that we did wrong and let's work together and be together. So that is all I think should be happening. I don't know what you think about this, but for me, I believe reparations must be paid, and African Americans or black Americans in the United States deserve to be reparated. And Africans also, for that matter, needs reparations. You may ask, why do Africa need reparation? To date, most European countries still hold artifacts that were captured and stolen from Africa. They interfered with our societal systems and governance structures. They changed our languages and interfered with our cultures. They came, took our resources, and they continue to take our resources, transport them to their countries, and benefit from them without giving us all that we deserve. So I think there is a sense in which a honest discussion must be held to discuss key issues that define human existence within this world. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.